Welcome to month 8 of Cheshire Quilters Guild 2018 block of the month. This is block 14, Star of Beauty. It's the first of 2 blocks for August 2018. The other block is Star of Destiny, so look for that video separately. To begin for Star of Beauty, we're going to make 4 half square triangles that measure 4 3/4 inches. To do that, I'm layering together my fabric A and C squares. And the next thing to do, I've sewn, you can draw a single line from point to point and stitch a 1/4 inch off of it, or in this case I used my magic wand to mark the sewing lines a 1/4 inch from either side of the diagonal. So I can just sew on the marked lines rather than having to keep a 1/4 inch off of a single drawn line. Once I get these sewn, I'm going to cut in half along the diagonal, and I'm going to press the seams open. And then they get trimmed to 4 3/4 inches. I'll meet you back here when I have my half square triangles finished. So I have my half square triangles pieced, and I've got them pressed open. I have options for trimming it up. One is to use a tucker trimmer 2 to trim it to 4 3/4. For that, I use the sizing diagonal on my sewn seam, and I trim 2 sides, pick up the unit, rotate it, again put the sizing diagonal on the sewn seam. The other 2 sides will line up with the 4 3/4 line. So that's how to trim it up with a tucker trimmer 2. The 2 does 3/4 and 1/4, so 1 1/4, 3/4, so forth. So that's why I'm using the tucker trimmer 2, because it has the 3/4 option on one side. If you don't have the tucker trimmer 2, then the way in which I would trim the half square triangle units is orient them with the seam going in this direction, and then when I lay on my tool, usually the ruler has a 45-degree angle on it. I can put the 45-degree angle on the sewn seam, trim 2 sides, much as I did, make sure I got it lined up good, much as I did with the tucker trimmer 2. Rotate it 180 degrees just like before, and then line up the 4 3. Oh, I don't like that right there. I'm going to turn it around this way. 4 3/4 marks on my trimmed edges, and you'll notice that 45 now lays on the seam just like I ought to. Trim, trim, and there's my half square triangles. So I'm going to trim up the rest of them and then move on to making a 1/4 square triangle. Alright, now we're going to make the 1/4 square triangle, and we're going to use the triangles we cut from fabrics E and F to do that. You're going to line them up with your fabrics oriented with fabric E on the left, so that when you flip them over, you're going to have fabric F on top. And when we can put this right under our sewing machine and stitch along this side. So I want to have both of my pairs oriented the same way. And I'm going to go stitch them, and I'm going to press the seams open on this also. We got a lot of seams coming together in this one, so we're using the pressing the seams open. If you're concerned about pressing the seams open, just shorten your stitch length a little bit, and all will be good. See you back here in a minute. So there's what our completed units look like, and here's, you can see the seam pressed open. So the next thing we're going to do is just layer these up, and what I like to do is take a pin and press it straight through from the top through the seam and pull them apart a little if you need to. I've got it right through. I've got it right through the seam on this side, but I'm a little bit off, so I'm going to smooth that pin over just a little bit. So now that I'm straight through both seams, my edges are even, I'm going to leave that pin alone. I don't want to take that one out. I'm going to take a second pin and pin the seam allowances together where it's going to feed into my machine, the one that's going to feed in first. And see, my pin is still nice and straight up and down, and I believe that's the best way. That's the best way I've found for me to pin seams that are open together. So I'm going to take this to the machine and stitch my 1/4 inch seam, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to trim it back to 4 3/4, just like I trimmed the half square triangles, but it's actually easier with the tucker trimmer too for doing the 1/4 square triangle, and I'll show you that when I get back. Now we can trim it to 4 3/4 again using our regular ruler and with the diagonal on one of the seams, but it's harder to line up where the ruler needs to go. You need to position it so the 4 3/4 marks are on the opposite diagonal. I prefer instead to use my 4 3/4 marks on my tucker trimmer too, because I can line up the 4 3/4 on one sewn seam, the diagonal, and the common diagonal on the other seam. So I know I have it positioned exactly right. I squiggled it a little bit. There we go. And when I rotate the unit around and reposition, we've got again the sizing diagonal 4 3/4 on two seams, and on one seam, and the common diagonal on the other seam, and of course my 4 3/4 edge is lined up nicely along the bottom. So there we have the 1/4 square triangle unit that we need. Alright, next up is to take those half square triangles that we have and stitch a fabric B triangle, the smaller ones. So these are the ones cut from the smaller triangle, and stitch them on the end. So we've got 4 of these triangles. So orient them all like this. I'm going to stitch those 4 triangles on the top of these 4 half square triangle units. Meet you back there when I have that complete. Okay, before I go any further, I'm just going to take my rotary cutter and I'm just going to nip off the dog ears on either side so that I have a unit that looks like this. The next thing to do with them is to take 2 of them and sew them on opposite sides of the 1/4 square triangle that we made. So I'm going to sew those, and those seams are going to get pressed open. I'll be back here to show you what else we need to put together. Okay, the center section's finished and pressed. So now we're going to do the corner sections. There's 2 of those, and that's what we're going to use our remaining 2 units from step 3 for. So we are going to simply stitch fabric B triangles on either side like this. The easiest way to stitch these is to line the triangle up with the square edge of the half square triangle and sew from the square edge out toward the point. So I'm going to do that on all these. These we're just going to press to the triangle, so we're going to get some nice looking corner units out of this. So let me go do these 2 corner sections, and I'll be right back. Okay, now we have the center section and the corner sections pieced. we can position them like this. You can see how they go together. Our seams are going to nest on these sides, at these seams. So I'm going to stitch those together, and I'm going to come back and show you how we trim it up. So here's the finished Star of Beauty. And if I orient it the same way as in the picture, there we go, Star of Beauty. And we're going to trim it to 12.5. I have a 12.5 inch ruler, which I find to be the easiest to trim a block like this. And I'm going to wiggle it around until I get a 1/4 inch point, or sorry, 1/4 inch seam outside each one of my points. I ought to be able to do that fairly well. And I'm going to trim it up, and there will be. So I'm going to do that, and I'll come back so you won't have that glare of the light. And there you have it, Star of Beauty. This is the first block of 2 for August 2018. So look for the other video for block 15, Star of Destiny. This is for the Cheshire Quilters Guild 2018 block of the month. See you back here next month when we make 2 blocks again, and those 2 blocks will be Grandma's Star and 1904 Star.